Okay. I guess there's a reason why I paused to look at the sunrise. The sunrise, I don't know if I can describe it to you. I asked Jay to take a picture because as I was walking through, like a minute before I'm here, walking through the house, you can see a minute before I'm here. Um, I saw it out the window. I said, take a picture. So then I see it coming around the building, coming down to the basement, and it was sort of dark, and then this sliver with orange on either edge and light coming through the middle. It was like stunning. But that's our experience when we're dealing with matter. It's the same thing. It's like there's this sliver of light and everything else looks like, "Ugh," and there's a sliver of light. Well, what do we focus on? We focus on the light. We don't focus on what makes an experience that is dark really pop and feel like, oh, this was amazing, was the light. It's when we get the light that we get the lesson from the dark. We're not going to get the lesson from the dark by sitting in the dark going, wow, really dark. This is really dark. We only get the lesson and get that uplift and get the glory when we look at the light. Then we see the contrast and we see, okay, now I see what it is that I have learned. The in this community, you guys know, fail faster, fail forward. It's like when we fail, when we make a mistake, it's not failing, it's a lesson, it's learning, it's saying, oh, I see something. With the and I don't know if I said this the other day when I was kind of saying, you guys never should have gotten those emails. But what I realized with that is there's such a there's such a pull in business to go the way everybody else is going. Well, I'm not going the way everybody else is going in life. Why would I do that in business? And business, I even hesitate to call it business, but I am on a mission to have more people know about this science. And that's what I'm called to do. So getting myself out of the way and putting the word out there is important. Great. But do I need to do it like everybody else is doing it? Absolutely not. Everybody else is talk about their pain, talk about what they need to overcome. It's like, that's not what I'm about. Focus on where we're going. Focus on what we're for, not on what we're against. Focus on the sunrise. Focus on the light. It's the light that makes it brilliant. It's the light that brings out the good. It's not the darkness. And yes, it is going to be contrasted with where we've come from. Of course. But the only reason we recognize that's not what we want is because we're looking at the light. If we keep looking at the darkness, okay, we might realize we don't want that, but we don't have a way out. We've got to see the way out in order to want to go in a different direction. So when we see the power of God and we see the power of light as opposed to darkness, the power of spirit as opposed to the belief in matter, then we have a path. Otherwise, we don't have a path. Otherwise, we're sitting on the dark path going, wow, this really stinks. Now what do I do? Well, the Bible, it's like right in the Bible lesson this week, if for those of you who study the Bible lesson, it's right at the very beginning. Let no man deceive himself, for the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. Trying to figure it out in the dark doesn't get us anywhere. So Mrs. Eddy has this wonderful thing in Unity of Good where she talks about, there is no matter. And this whole week, we're really looking at this question of, is the universe, including man, evolved by atomic force? Is this whole experience based in matter? Is this whole thing based in the belief that matter is real? Or can we see our way through the illusion of that to the reality? What is the reality? And does that actually affect the life as we know it here on Earth? Well, Mrs. Eddy has some really clear pieces about that. According to Christian Science, she says, the first idolatrous claim of sin, the first idolatrous claim of sin, just like pause on that, the idolatrous claim of sin. It's like, that's so powerful. We can unpack that for days. She talks about four things. First, that matter exists, that it even exists. Well, quantum physics tells us it doesn't, let alone divine science tells us it doesn't. Even quantum physics is catching up to the idea that it doesn't exist. There is no matter. Two, or second, that matter is substance. Does matter actually have substance? Nope, it doesn't. It doesn't have substance because if thought isn't on it, it doesn't exist. And again, quantum physics is now backing it up, the observer effect. If it's not observed, it doesn't exist. It only exists once it's observed. It's like, well, Mrs. Eddy knew this back in the 1800s, like way ahead of her time. Clearly tuned into the reality, tuned into what God is telling us, not what mortals are telling us. Third, that matter has intelligence. Can matter in and of itself have intelligence all by itself? Or is there thought governing what we see or what we seem to see as matter? Matter is just mortal mind expressed. It's the effect of mortal mind. Well, mortal mind is the false sense. So clearly all of it false. Well, that doesn't make sense because I'm, walking around and I have like a body and I have a wall and there's a desk and a computer and it all looks very material. Yeah. And where is thought about this? We're observing it. We're seeing it. Huh. Is God seeing it? Is God seeing matter? Or is God knowing ideas? Like these are the questions that sound very lofty and like, oh, well, I don't know. But like pause on them and just take a breath and really ponder them deeply. Fourth, that matter, being so endowed with intelligence, produces life and death. That somehow matter could produce life and death. Well, that's the belief of Cancer, that matter could produce life, that it could be somehow this separate organization of matter that could start producing itself. It's a rampant false belief that needs to be addressed every day. Every day. And that's what we in this community can be doing. If you have a pretty straightforward life and there aren't a lot of problems, start addressing the big ones. Start addressing the big ones that the world is dealing with. Start really praying those through and understanding the unreality of matter, the reality of spirit, so that there's no question what we're focused on and where we're going. Mrs. Eddy says the notion of a material universe is utterly opposed to the theory of man as evolved from mind. It's utterly opposed. So if we have some notion that the material universe exists, has intelligence, can create its own stuff, it is substance, all of those four things, that exists, that it has substance, that it has intelligence, that it can create and destroy. If we're buying into that belief, then we get to address that in our own thought. We get to dig down and really look at that. Say, where does it come up in my life? Well, I mean, the story I shared yesterday of a sibling kind of assaulting me verbally. I had an opportunity yesterday to communicate via email and some information that I tried to find for them, that I told them I knew nothing of what they were speaking and they weren't having that. So I made a phone call and recorded the phone call so they could hear it from the other individual and not from me, since they didn't really trust me. But I had an occasion to send all of this off in an email. And it's in those little moments that we test the mettle of our spiritual warriorness. Where is thought while we're doing that? Oh, yeah, I know this is what I'm supposed, but am I truly loving or am I being defensive? Like, where is thought? And the purity of my stance is the only thing I get to think about. That's the only thing I don't need to be judging him, worrying about him, thinking about, oh, him, I guess I said, my brother. Um, oops. I don't need to be having him in my thought while I'm doing this other than pure love expressed. Because the closer I am and the closer my thought is to be the reflection of God, the more healing will be realized. If I'm holding myself separate from my relationship with God by thinking things that aren't godlike, then I'm not on the path of healing. I'm on the path of the problem. So it comes down to, how am I operating in this moment while I'm dealing with this thing? Where's my thought? It's all about disciplining thought. It's all about aligning thought with what God is knowing. The great I am, the all knowing, all seeing. God knows, God sees. I don't have to do it for him. I get to just align with what God's knowing, align with what is God knowing about my brother? What is God seeing about my brother? What is God knowing about me? God's not knowing me as upset or defensive or hurt or confused or any of those things or incapable. There were lots of things I was accused of being. So I get to work through all of that and go, okay, no, I'm not that, because I know God's not that. So how are we showing up? Who are we showing up to be? Who would you have me be? What would you have me know? What would you have me see? What would you have me do? Notice that what you would have me do is down the list. Many of you are very familiar with this, and it's repetition, but line upon line. We're gonna go over stuff a lot. So the notion of a material universe is utterly opposed to the theory of man as evolved from mind. Such fundamental errors send falsity into all human doctrines and conclusions, and do not accord infinity to deity. Fundamental error send falsity into human conclusions, human doctrines and conclusions. Well, when you experience that with another individual, you know exactly what needs to be dealt with. Are we buying into matter as real? The fundamental idolatrous sin, making matter an idol, that it exists, that it has substance, that it has intelligence, that it can create and destroy. Look at that in your own experience and see where it is coming up for you. It still comes up for me around food and body. And I don't think that's so unusual since we seem to have these human bodies. We do have these human bodies. We don't seem to have human bodies. We have human bodies. Okay. But how am I identifying the human body? As the expression of the one body or as a hunk of matter walking around separate from God? God and its idea is one. If we see it as separate, and it's challenging. I mean, if one of you has this worked out, call me because I want to learn from you. Mrs. Eddy said, if you don't understand soul, don't even bother trying to understand body. I was like, oh, thank you for that. Because the idea of having a body is hard. Well, are we denying that we have a body? No, we're not denying that we have a body. We're denying that we have a material body. We don't have a body in matter. We're denying that. We have a body in spirit, in and of spirit. What does that look like? Consciousness expressed as spirit. So getting present to that and sort of understanding that really helps. Mrs. Eddy talks about, if materialistic knowledge is power, it is not wisdom, it is but a blind force. So the more knowledge we have in matter and in materialistic forms and ways and being and doing, the more we're going down the path of error. It's not wisdom, and it's a blind force. And we feel the effect of the blind force as long as we're buying into it. You know, the punishment of sin lasts only so long as the belief lasts in sin. That's total paraphrased. The belief in sin is punished so long as the belief lasts. That's a little bit closer to the quote. So, are we believing in this hunk of matter as the reality of our being, as the source of our identity, as the container for our identity? And we talked about this the other day briefly, but if we know that when we, get past this human experience, our identity doesn't change, and we do know that, then where's that individual now? When it looks like that individual is a hunk of matter now, and that individual doesn't change when the hunk of matter goes away, then where's that individual now? That's what we get to be in touch with. We get to be very present to that. So where Mrs. Eddy talks about Jesus being the most scientific man that ever trod the globe, she describes him as he plunged beneath the material surface of things and found the spiritual cause. So it's that causal element of the reality of identity. It's the sort of, what's the cause of your identity? What's the cause of you being an individual idea, walking around with an identity, with a sense of, the true sense is ego expressed individually. The false sense is with a separate ego running around being, the little I, slipping into, I am the expression of the one ego individually. Yes. I'm a separate little I running around managing my own stuff. No. But what is the cause of that identity? Are we present to that? Do we think about that? Do we contemplate that? Are we dwelling on it? Jesus plunged beneath the material surface of things. He didn't settle for looking at matter and calling it real. He didn't look at a leper and deal with a leper. He dealt with a child of God. He plunged beneath the picture that he saw and saw God's child and freed the individual from the sense of a material identity that's holding them in a lie. We get to do that with ourselves. Free ourselves from that sense of material identity held in matter, held in a physical body. And yes, we tend to experience this by degrees. Yeah, that's okay. A lot of us try to start where Mrs. Eddy ended. She had a whole lifetime of growing in her understanding of the science and rewriting Science and Health. I don't even know how many times. I'm sure there's data on that somewhere where somebody can state a fact of it. But it's a lot of times. It's like over 100 times or something. So clearly she was still growing and stretching in her understanding of the science and refining the articulation of it more and more and more. Well, can't we give ourselves a little bit of a break? That we're on this path and we are expanding our sense of this truth of reality while we drop the earth weights, as Mrs. Eddy says. We're dropping that sense of ourselves as being stuck in matter, that matter's the source of who we are. No, it's just a false sense of who we are. We get to grab onto the real sense. Which institutes life, she asks us, matter or mind? How would we answer that? I mean, we know the right answer. Clearly, you're here. You know the right answer. That's not what we're talking about. We're not going to settle for just saying the right answer. Like, I'm going to be a good student. I'm going to say, I know this is the right answer. Think it through. Like if you don't really think that's the right answer, or you don't really think that's what you think the answer is, start with where you are. I think that's really important for all of it. It is for me anyway. I can't talk for you, but for me, it's important for me to just kind of admit where I am in thought. Because only by being honest about that with myself do I get the inspiration I need to see beyond it. If I just kind of grab the thing and go, oh yeah, that's what I think, when I don't really get it, I don't have the opportunity to let the Christ in. It's like by ego coming in and saying, I know the right answer. It's like I'm not leaving the space for the Christ to uplift my sense of it to that place of understanding, not just kind of blind belief. Well, yeah, I believe that. I do believe it because if I see that, then yeah, I believe it. But do I understand that? And if I don't, I'm going to say, okay, this is where my understanding sits right now. And that lets in the Christ. And then we get that aha that we all love. And we go, oh, I get it. You get that little flash of insight, that flash of inspiration, that angel thought that comes swooping in out of nowhere. I love it when that happens. And you get that little aha. So she goes on to say, does life begin with mind or with matter? That's a really good question. Like we were just talking about before, like what is the source, the inception of our identity? Is it I was born, my two parents, growing up in matter? Or wasn't I an idea like way before that? I mean, I was even an idea between my two parents, unless it really was a complete surprise. It was a surprise to my dad. It wasn't a surprise to my mom. My mom planned it. My dad had no idea. She wanted to have a third one. He wasn't so keen on the idea, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure if he even thought about it. She wanted she wanted another one. So there was an idea there. Where she got that idea, I don't know. I'm glad she had the idea. And maybe that was a godlike idea that just sort of landed there. And she had this idea. It's like, we can trace it back, even in those human terms, we can trace it back. But does life begin with mind, capital M, God, or with matter? I mean, it's become so obvious when you pause and look at it. Is life sustained by matter or by spirit? Oh, now we start to get to it. It's like, what a great question. What is sustaining us? Are you growing your fingernails? Are you growing those? Like, are you growing your fingernails today? You growing your hair? Are you beating your heart? Did you make yourself get taller when you were a little kid? Like, what is sustain? So then do we look at that in matter, or do we say, wait a second, the power of God is constantly being expressed. God is constantly being expressed as an idea. That progress can't be inhibited. The growth, the expression of mind can never be inhibited. What would mortal mind do? Try to influence us into thinking that it's limited, that mind's expression is limited, that mind's expression somehow could be turned on its head and come out wrong. Can't be. But when we get the source, when we get present to the source, it becomes really obvious that matter has nothing to do with it. And what we see as matter, our sense of things that looks material, really is just a false sense of the idea having substance. The true idea having substance is spirit. Our sense of it right now looks like it's material. That's okay. We know the truth and we can hold to the truth. And there's peace in that. And there's healing in that. And there's a sense of understanding. It can't be reversed. Matter can't overtake mind. And any experience you have or are having where it looks like matter is overtaking mind, that somehow there's something chaotic. Somebody's out of control. Somebody's not following the rules. Somebody's doing, like, having bad behavior. Somebody's being mean. Somebody's assaulting you. Does it mean God's not in control anymore? No. But unless we understand the source of our being and the source of everyone's being, we can get sidetracked and distracted and sucked into the illusion that there's a false ego operating outside the law of God, being unkind and untrue and, hurting themselves in the case of, people who deal with family members who are dealing with addiction or dealing with whatever. That's, we get to see through the illusion of that from our own perspective and call them forward into the truth of their being. Make the space for them to walk into who they truly are by seeing them as they really are, not seeing the lie. The universe is filled with spiritual ideas, Mrs. Eddy says, which he evolves. So anyone who seems to be having a hard time or out of sorts, or when we seem to be out of sorts and having a hard time, Mrs. Eddy says, the universe is filled with spiritual ideas, which he evolves. So the evolution of the idea is built into the idea. The evolution of the idea, the evolution of our experience, of our expression, is built into our identity. You can't help but progress. You can't help but realize healing. You can't help it. It's not in mortal mind's power to get in the way and inhibit it. And the only thing that would try to make us believe that is the influence of mortal mind. Oops, nope, I can't be influenced by mortal mind. I'm immune to the influence of mortal mind. Claim it. By design or by default, we know this. If we're not claiming it, that's why Mrs. Eddy was so clear about defend yourself daily against aggressive mental suggestion. Defend yourself daily, or mortal mind's going to run right over you. And you are going to be influenced by it and act out of the lie. Defend yourself daily and say, no, I cannot be influenced by mortal mind. I cannot be made to believe that I am a material, finite identity that's full of problems and going to die off the planet. Like, that just sounds horrible. Who wants to believe that? I am not influenced by mortal mind. I'm not buying into the lie and the illusion of that. Not. Spiritual ideas which he evolves, and they are obedient to the mind that makes them. That would be us. We are all spiritual ideas. We are obedient to the mind, divine mind, God, all intelligence that makes us. And that includes everybody we know, everybody we love, and everybody else who we don't even know. I'm thinking political figures right now. People on the world stage. It's late, but I feel like I want to share this. I was listening to an interview with a tennis player who had a reputation of being current tennis player who was very, top, was in the Wimbledon finals. So top player, and had a reputation of being a real, like, so-and-so, kind of arrogant and volatile and on the court. Kind of, I think he was labeled like the next generation's McEnroe kind of thing. But he battled with this reputation for a long time and had a very dark patch where he was suicidal and on drugs and drinking, and all while excelling in tennis, which is like crazy. Was contemplating suicide, standing on the balcony of a hotel, and his team is saying, you got to be on the court in 10 minutes to play Nadal, like top player in the world. And he himself was not at all like that. It was kind of how he managed emotion and stress and the court, and being a very young player. He was 19 at the time. But what's interesting is the media, and I want us to all really hear this. The media wanted that character to show up, and they kept asking for like the branding, his brand, the people who were running his brand kept asking for that to show up because that's what got a lot of attention. Completely against his natural tendency and who he truly was. That's exactly how mortal mind operates. Like, be alert that mortal mind is trying to get us to act in a way that's opposite to our divine inclinations. And we don't have to put up with that no matter what it looks like, because sometimes it looks like it could be tempting to go in that direction because it looks all bright and shiny. It doesn't always look dark and horrible. Sometimes it looks bright and shiny, particularly with people who have lives that are pretty good, particularly for people who have an understanding of this science and are demonstrating it. How's mortal mind going to try to get in the way? It's going to come from both sides of the spectrum. So just be really alert to that. You know, be willing rather to be absent from the body and present with the Lord, as Paul says. Be absent from the suggestions. Be immune to the lies of mortal mind. Hold yourself immune. It's not who you are. Dispute the testimony of the material senses, Mrs. Eddy says. Like, we got to be really alert and dispute it and not fall into that. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting about the media and the branding machine, because we all have that in our lives on some level. Yeah, it looks extreme with somebody who's sort of a public figure, but the history of who you are, your personality, how everybody knows you, how friends expect us to show up. If you're trying to break an old habit and your friends keep saying, show up this way, this is what I'm accustomed to, and you're changing and they don't really like it, because be alert to what's really going on there and stand your ground, I guess, is really the main thing. Take a stand. Let no man deceive himself. We'll go right back to where we started. Okay, let's bring it in. Well, in 1 Corinthians 2:12 says it all. You know, we have not received the world's spirit, and that's little s. We have received the Spirit sent by God, capital S, so that we may know all that God has given us and be satisfied and be grateful and feel the fullness of that and the fullness of our identity, and that we are enough as God has created us to be. The world is going to try to tell you you're not enough all the time. Claim your enoughness as a reflection of God, because you're amazing. God doesn't God doesn't play around. He doesn't make like stuff that has bad quality. You guys are You're the best God has created. Like, take that in for a second. God created you as you for a reason, because he needs you to be you. And you're amazing. Just saying, you are amazing. So embrace that idea. Embrace your amazingness and put off the ploys of mortal mind. Just, you're immune. It's like, talk to the hand, mortal mind. I will have none of that. And claim your divinity. Claim your anointed self. Claim the Spirit of God expressed as you. Okay. Much love. I will see you tomorrow.